Hello, everybody. My name is Kelly Higgins. I am the Executive Director for the Autism Community Connection. Thank you for joining us today. Just a little bit about ACC. We're a small nonprofit here in Johnson County serving those affected by autism. We have several programs for young adults, teens. We have a Breakfast with Santa coming up this December. So just go check us out on our website. We have a lot going on. But today we are happy to host a webinar about IEPs. And we have the wonderful Lesa Paddack here from InSource to kind of go over about the IEPs and learning about what to do, not to do. So we'll let Lesa take it away. Lesa, thank you so much for joining us.
Kelly, thank you so much. And thank you all for joining us tonight, or if you're watching at a later time when it's more convenient. Thank you so much. As Kelly said, my name is Lesa Paddack, and I am one of the assistant directors at InSource, Indiana's Resource Center for Families with Special Needs. And InSource is Indiana's Parent Training and Information Center. And our first few slides will talk a little bit about what that means and where we get our funding from and what we do. And then we will jump right into talking about the IEP, Individual Education Program. So tonight, or if you've been watching afterwards, if you would please scan the QR code and sign in. This will give you the resources that are mentioned during the presentation. A training survey, please fill that out. We take those very seriously. We want to know if we're answering your questions, what we might do differently or better, or if it took care of all the questions that you had. And you can print off a certificate at that time. So please sign in with this QR code so that you can receive the resources and print off your certificate if you would like to. And again, thank you so much for joining us tonight. So very quickly, this is just a legal disclaimer. I am not an attorney. None of our staff are attorneys. And this information is provided for educational purposes and does not constitute legal advice. If you need an attorney, please contact an attorney about your specific legal questions. So first, you will see our mission, vision, and belief statement. And I won't read that out loud. You can read that for yourself. But in general, we are here to help families understand the special ed process. And we are here to try to help ensure equal access for individuals with disabilities and access to education and to the community. So we're here to provide high quality information, training, and support to families of children and young adults with disabilities. We want to see children and young adults with disabilities thrive and have access to their communities and to education. And we believe it is our social and moral purpose to ensure that every child and young adult with disabilities are able to have inclusive opportunities and equitable access to appropriate challenges. So, the first few slides, we will talk a little bit about InSource and what InSource is, what a parent training center is, and then we'll jump right into IEP. So, InSource is Indiana's Parent Training and Information Center, and we were established by a group of parents who wanted to better understand what IDEA, which it wasn't called that 50 years ago, what it meant to educate their children. Because before the law changed, individuals with disabilities were not allowed to go to school. So we were established in 1975, and we were one of the first 5 parent centers in the United States. And you will see here where our current funding comes from. And we do receive state and federal funding, which is also part of why we ask you to do a survey to show that we are out in the community sharing information to parents, community stakeholders, schools, anyone who attends our trainings. So you might ask, how do we help? Well, we spend a lot of time supporting families all throughout the state. So we have regional staff that are located throughout the state in all the areas across the state. So there's no area that is not served by one of our special education liaisons. We do not call our staff advocates because that gave ideas that we were there to speak for a parent. We are here to teach advocacy skills and, yes, help with some hard conversations, but we are not attorneys and we are not like a paid advocate. We are here to provide phone electronic assistance and helping families understand that special education process. So you will see here many of the things that we do. We spend a lot of time emailing and providing support and over the phone. We do attend case conferences in both in person and virtually. And we really work to support families in schools to help them hopefully work together. And as I stated, we have liaisons who serve the entire state. We also provide students with training on self-advocacy. We even have a school interpreter program. So we provide support in a variety of different ways. So you might ask, as I said, what does our staff do? We do, as I stated, assist in understanding that special education process, parents' rights, roles, and responsibilities. We help the families and the schools work together and hopefully develop a positive working relationship. And sometimes when we attend a meeting, we can help facilitate some communication as we have said at hundreds of meetings, our staff have, and sometimes we're able to come up with some new thoughts for the case conference committee to consider. We also help families understand what the process is if they disagree. So we talk with them about what a complaint is, how you file it if you feel the need, what mediation is, what a facilitated IEP is, and what due process is. And of course, most importantly, we help parents and students become better advocates. And you will find our YouTube channel. You will find a variety of resources and trainings on our website at insource.org. So today, here are some of the things that we are going to cover. The 6 principles of IDEA, factors to be considered in the IEP, an overview of the required components of the IEP, because there are certain things that are required. We're going to talk a little bit about LRE and what it is, and the difference in accommodations and modifications, and resolving disagreements. What happens when you're not in agreement with the offering of FAPE, free and appropriate public education? And along the way, if you have questions, just drop them in the chat and Kelly will let me know. So first, we're going to talk a little bit about the 6 principles of IDEA, which is the federal law. So in Indiana, one of the things we do talk about is Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. IDEA is the national law. We happen to also have a state law called Article 7, and it was just revised. And you can find the new version on DOE's website and on our website. Navigating the course is being updated even as we speak. So you can look forward to that coming out soon in a family-friendly version of Article 7. So when you understand that there's a federal law and a state law, you should also understand that the state law can do more, but not less than the federal law. So that is part of why we talk about these 6 principles of IDEA as basic rights. Okay, so these are basic rights that are provided to eligible students, a student that has an IEP. Okay, and it is important for parents to understand the underlying issues that might be related to their concerns. So first, we're going to talk about free and appropriate public education. I've already mentioned that, known as FAPE. Students with disabilities have right to educational services appropriate to meet their needs. Now, you can get a copy of Article 7, as I said, on our website or DOE's website, and all of this information is on there. And additionally, there's an index that you can look up this information in Article 7. So appropriate services do not always mean the very best services, but they are appropriate for the student to make progress. The IEP itself, the Individualized Education Program, which is a written plan that describes special services a student will receive. Appropriate evaluations provides information about the student's educational needs that result from the student's disability. LRE, you probably have heard that term, and we'll talk a little bit about what that means, least restrictive environment. So students with disabilities are to be educated with typical peers in their general ed classes with same age peers as much as possible. And again, that is federal law and state law. Procedural safeguards. I'm sure that if your child has an IEP, you have seen these. They're typically about 24 pages long. Many people laugh and say they have enough to wallpaper their house, but I would encourage you to please take them and read them. They are your protections. Okay, they're the set of rules and procedures that define and protect students, parents, and school rights. So it is important to understand the process. And lastly, parents and students have specific rights to participate in the process. Okay, so that is actually one of the protections under the law. So those are the 6 principles of IDEA. So we're going to talk a little bit about an IEP. And in Indiana, the Indiana IEP system, all schools use the same system. Now, that is changing as far as there are going to be changes to the system. But from my understanding, all schools will still use this new system. So there are certain IEP core components. So in special education, there are many acronyms, there are many timelines, and there are core components or things that are necessary in order to make an IEP compliant. And we're going to talk about some of those things. So that IEP is a written document that is developed, reviewed, and revised by the case conference committee. And it describes what special education and related services the student will receive and how the student will access their general ed curriculum. So student, in order to get an IEP, has to have an evaluation. They have to be found eligible, and then an IEP is written. IDEA requires that students with disabilities be involved in general education curriculum as much as possible. So when we look at components, that is part of a component. So student involved in general curriculum to the maximum extent possible, and parent and student involved in those decisions. So parent and student are just as important in that case conference committee as anyone that is on the school staff. And to provide students with supports and services that lead to employment and independent living. Okay, so students who qualify for an IEP need special services and supports to succeed in general education setting and curriculum. A lot of times that's why they have an IEP. Those supports that they need are documented in their IEP and they are tailored to the student's individual needs. So that's why that is so important. It is, what does the student need? And parents and students, as appropriate, are to be given the opportunity to participate in those meetings, and they are to be actively engaged at every opportunity possible. And parents should share concerns and help identify their students' educational needs. And they are required to be kept informed of their students' educational progress. So the goal is the school will provide the student with these supports and services that help lead to employment and independent living. So, in order to receive an IEP, a student has to have an evaluation. Okay, there are 13 areas of eligibility. So, for a student to have an IEP, they have to be found eligible in at least one of these areas. And when you look in Article 7, there are criteria for each of these areas. Okay, so it is really important for families to discuss with the school, to look in Article 7 themselves, to consider what area they want to have their child evaluated in. So, when we talk about educational evaluation, here are some of the things that are considered: the student's development, their cognition, their academic achievement, their functional performance, and or adaptive behavior. So, in order to have an IEP, that means that the student has to have a disability that negatively impacts academics or functional performance or both. It does not mean for the majority of the eligibility categories that they have to have an outside medical diagnosis. So many times a student would. Okay. When we look at an IEP, it is, does that disability impede this student from learning and functioning at school? Additionally, their communication skills will be looked at, their motor and sensory abilities, available medical information, and social and developmental history. So, parent has to sign a consent for an evaluation, and the very first IEP is called an initial IEP. From that point on, it is an IEP that has been in effect, and there is an annual case review, and there's some different rules that follow that IEP moving forward. But the very first initial will not go into effect if a parent doesn't sign it. So you have to sign consent for the evaluation. You have to sign consent for the initial IEP. So when we look at an IEP and we look at the evaluation, a multidisciplinary team conducts the evaluation. Okay, that is a team of a variety of professionals employed by the school. And the membership of the team varies depending on the suspected need of the student and the area of suspected disability. That's why it is important for a parent to share their concerns when they're asking for an evaluation. So the school team, typically the psychologist, um, will be able to talk with you about what areas of eligibility you would like to have evaluated. They cannot evaluate for an area that the parent does not give consent for. So, more than one test must be administered using a variety of evaluation tools that are non discriminatory. The tools must be valid and reliable, meaning they accurately measure the area that they are designed to evaluate. And additionally, the evaluation measures the student's abilities and capabilities and not just the disability. They are to be assessed in all areas related to the suspected disability. So, as I stated, there are 13 areas of eligibility. And when you look at them, there are some that have, there's one that has an age criteria, developmental delay, eligibility for blind and low vision or deaf and hard of hearing. They have some criteria related to vision and related to hearing. So it's important to look at those areas of eligibility. It's important to discuss with the school team so that you know what area you're giving consent for evaluation and that you have shared your concerns with the school. Your student can be evaluated for more than one area. So the results provide relevant information to directly help the case conference committee determine the needs of the student and whether they're going to be eligible or ineligible for special ed services. Those assessments are tailored to help determine the specific areas of educational need and If you have medical information that's relevant to the child's educational needs, the school would often appreciate having that. And again, a medical diagnosis is not the same as educational eligibility. The two systems use different criteria. So, what are some of the things that an IEP must contain? So, the IEP is specifically designed for each student and must contain certain things, okay? It must contain present levels of performance. And present levels of performance include the student's academic performance and functional performance. How they do academically, how do they do at reading and math and writing, as well as functional at school. How do they do their routine activities? How are they relating to their peers? Okay. Present levels must be informative and current in order to write goals. And goals um, basically should be what are called, everybody's heard, SMART, right? And there's lots of different words for SMART, but a lot of times people call it specific, measurable, action words, realistic, relevant, and time limited. But it can be a variety of things. In general, a goal should pass a stranger test. The whole IEP should. So in a goal, you are typically um, teaching a skill of some kind, and you want to make sure it's measurable. You want to make sure that you know how often it will be measured, and in what way will it be measured. Will it be measured by checking an assessment, or will it be measured by teacher observation? So it is important to understand what the goal is, and the goal should be based on present levels. And then later on, we'll talk a little bit about placement, or LRE, and where those goals can be met is how we determine where that child will be sitting, which should be their least restrictive environment. The IEP will say how that progress is measured, which is what I was just, discussing. A parent needs to know, are they hoping that my child will read with 80% fluency? Um, is it a goal where they are staying the present levels? My child has an aggressive behavior 10 times a week and they want to move it to once a week. You need to understand and ask questions about goals. And those goals, again, need to be addressing um, the level of supports that the student needs. What are the issues the student's having? So those goals should help teach the skill that the student needs. Additionally, it will talk about um, the progress monitoring that you will get quarterly at the same time or whenever the report cards are. But you can also ask for it more often in some other ways. We'll talk about that. Regarding special ed and related services, so will my child receive speech services? And will that be direct or consult? Okay. Your IEP will discuss those special ed and related services for your child. And if a parent doesn't understand any of those things, they need to ask questions. And in source, if we are attending, we will often ask some questions to ensure that a family understands what the school is saying. Because there's a lot of acronyms, there's a lot of time frames, there are a lot of things that people take for granted that a parent might understand. And we want to make sure that parents are fully informed so they can make their own good decisions. Because we feel like if you don't have all the information, you will not be able to make an appropriate choice for your child. So, additionally, the IEP must contain a consideration of extended school year. Often, honestly, this is overlooked. Extended school year should be discussed for every child who has an IEP. Okay. And ESY, or extended school year, is defined as beyond school calendar or instructional days. And typically, that's going to be looked at. Does your child regress more than other students? But it can also be other situations. Maybe there's um, a window of opportunity or a special circumstance. Maybe they've just had surgery and maybe the request is that they have some PT services to be able to access the playground when they come back because they're going to need that. Extended school year services, there should be a meaningful discussion about it. LRE, which once again is one of the 6 principles of IDEA, has to do with the fact that all kids should be educated in their least restrictive environment. So the very first place we talk about education for a student is in the general ed classroom, then general ed classroom with supports, and then maybe more supports before we think of moving the student out. Now, that does not mean that all students will be successful in general ed. There are some students who need some more significant support, and they might even need a different classroom. But there are questions to be discussed, such as if they need a separate classroom for academics, do they also need that separate classroom for lunch and PE and other activities? Typically, we would want to see that student obviously receiving the support that they need, if that, wherever that is, but it doesn't mean that that student would necessarily need to be in a self-contained classroom all day. Additionally, are there academic classes that this student has interest in that they also should be exposed to? Because by law, they're to be continually being exposed to general ed curriculum to the greatest extent possible. So there's a lot of questions, and your in-source person can help you with those. Special requirements apply when a student is approaching the age of 18. I won't go too far into that, but then when they turn 18, they become the parent, okay, unless there's been a guardian appointed. And on the ARC of Indiana's website and Family to Family, you'll find information about guardianship and supported decision making. And so I encourage you to reach out to them to find out more. And there's written notes of the meeting. So during the meeting, feel free to ask to see if they can project the IEP on a screen or the wall. Ask questions during the meeting. Ask for them, if they can't and you can't see it, to read back the section about what your concerns are, what the present levels are, what the notes say. Okay, you can ask to review the notes, and at the end say, could you please read the notes to me so that I make sure it captures everything we've been discussing. And the notes don't have to be like a full conversation, but they should hit the points that were discussed and any actions that need to be taken. So it is important to have notes that reflect the meeting. You can ask to include any significant discussions that maybe were omitted and weren't included. Okay, especially if you propose something at the case conference that the school said no, it's good to capture that. Parent, has requested a one-on-one. School has stated they don't feel that there's data for that. Whatever is occurring, having an accurate reflection in the notes is very important. Okay. And if you propose something at that case conference that the school denied or didn't address, then the school needs to respond with written notice when proposals are made. We're not going to get too far into specifics tonight because we only have 1 hour, but it is important to know that schools have a responsibility to provide written notice about activities and proposals that families have requested. So we're going to talk about a teacher of record. That is your child's special education service teacher. Licensed, trained in the student's area of eligibility. That is the person who oversees the special ed process for a specific child at school. In Indiana, there can be a teacher of record and a teacher of service. The teacher of record is responsible for making certain everything in the IEP is being implemented and for making certain that all personnel working with that student are aware of the IEP. That would include a behavior plan also. That would include accommodations or modifications and services in the IEP. And the teacher of record can provide an IEP at a glance to appropriate staff that work with the student. This is not the same as the entire IEP. Okay? So an IEP at a glance is like a summary, but it should include the important information, including the behavior plan, if there is one. We encourage parents to establish communication with a teacher of record, develop a relationship. This is your first go-to person. We also encourage parents to develop a relationship with the principal and their special education director. Many times problems can be solved and complaints to the state avoided with reaching out to the director to explain your concern, because many times they do not know that you have a concern or having a problem. So there are some particular things to think and keep in mind. So there are some monitoring things I want to mention. So beginning in grade 9, the teacher of record is to communicate at least one time each grading period with the student's parent concerning the student's progress toward the student's selected diploma. The teacher of record must be licensed and trained in the student's area of disability. Many times a teacher might have a license for mild disabilities. It is not required that direct instruction be provided by that teacher of record. As I mentioned, some services could be provided indirectly, such as a consult or a resource, and they could have a teacher of service that is overseen by the teacher of record. So I've mentioned LRE. So before special education laws, there were about 1 million children with special needs in the nation that were entirely excluded from public school. And families had to find services or something to try to help their child. And it was typically at their own expense. And maybe they went to school early on, but not many times as they got older. So schools are now required to have written policies which ensure that students are included and exposed to a variety of opportunities. Kelly, are there any questions?
None at this time.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about LRE because it is very important. You will see on the slide here that to the maximum extent appropriate, students must be educated in their general education setting. Accommodations and modifications can be made in the general education setting. When a student gets to high school, their work cannot be modified or the complexity of it changed, and they still receive a credit. So when it comes to high school, things do change, okay? And anytime a student is working and they're working on modified work in middle school or elementary, it is important for a family to know that's what is happening and that they're not being exposed to grade level material at that time. So special classes, separate schooling, or placement other than general ed only occurs if you see these two components. Education with the same age peers cannot be achieved based on the nature and severity of the disability, and the CCC determines that the student needs a setting outside of general education. So it is important to understand that in general, most kids with IEPs are going to be in their general education classroom, and even students with significant disabilities should also be in their general education classroom. And that may mean they need more support. And there may be opportunities and times when a student needs a more restrictive environment, but that should not be an assumption. Just because a child has autism or Down syndrome, that they're going to go to a special classroom. There has to be a reason for that. Otherwise, those children are educated in the general education classroom. And even if they are removed, they should continue to have exposure to general ed curriculum as much as possible. So we're going to talk a little bit about accommodations. Okay. An accommodation means it is accommodated, right? It maintains that targeted skill level. It does not change the grade level standard that's being taught or tested, and they are intended to mitigate or eliminate the negative impact on the disability. on the student's performance. So an accommodation, extra time, talk to text, small group testing still maintains the targeted skill level. Okay. Using manipulatives to count, or using expressive language in a different way, perhaps using a scribe. Those are accommodations. It is not changing the skill level. Okay. And accommodations are meant to mitigate or eliminate the negative impact of the disability on the student's performance. So a student with an IEP may describe additional accommodations that will be used during the school day. That student's IEP can list those accommodations that need to be used, but there are only certain accommodations that can be used on a state test. But it doesn't go the other way. So you would not put in accommodations for only a state assessment that you don't need daily. Okay. And on the DOE's website, there is this link to the IDOE accommodations guide. And every year it is changed and tweaked a little bit. There are a lot of guidelines and rules around the use of accommodations and testing in IEPs. So accommodations on state tests are restricted to those expressly allowed by the test. So there are some criteria, but as I stated before, if you need it on the state test, you're probably going to have been using it every day. Okay. But there are some limits on those state tests. Some restrictions, we might say. Must be provided routinely to the student as needed throughout the school year, as just what I mentioned. It's not just an accommodation for the state test. If they need extra time or talk to text, they should be using that regularly and then just using it for the state assessment also. Additionally, you wouldn't want to be trying to teach a new accommodation skill for a student that they've never used when it's on a state assessment. You want them to be using those accommodations daily and have them listed in the IEP. So I already mentioned some of them: closed captioning, online calculator, talk to text, scribe, a variety of different things. And student must have documented evidence of need. So just because they have a need for small group testing in English, we can't assume they necessarily have the need for small group testing in math. Modification is different. A modification means that the material that is being taught or tested, the complexity of it is being changed and it is not at the grade level standard. Okay? It reduces the complexity of the targeted skill or understanding so that it is less than what is expected of others. Okay? So that is very important. It may allow a student to be included in the general ed setting and participate in aspects of the general ed curriculum. So it is individualized. But over time, it does set the student on a course of study where they probably will not reach the level of performance needed for a general or core 40 diploma. And it may also indicate an alternate assessment like IM, or an alternate diploma track or certificate of completion track is what this student needs. So also we want to talk some about that continuum of service. As I was talking about before, LRE, where the student gets educated, the continuum of service. And as you see here, there's a list of continuum of service. So placement and services will look different for different students. Some students may only require additional time for taking a test, or may only need speech therapy once a week. And these students will spend most of their time in the general ed, and their peers may not even know they have an IEP. Other students will need more support, but they may still spend all of their day in general ed. But then there will be some students who have enough need of support that they're going to spend at least some time in a special education classroom. Schools are able to meet a variety of student needs with the flexibility of the IEP, and this slide shows the continuum of service. It also does not mean that this full continuum is offered in every school building. School is allowed to place their services and funds um, in certain locations, but they do have to offer the continuum of service. And additionally, first you would want to consider, discuss, and hopefully assume that the student would go to their local neighborhood school. You would not necessarily want to assume that they couldn't go there. You have to show why their need could not be met there. So, finalizing the initial IEP, as I said, parent must provide written consent before the services can start. Sometimes we'll get a call and a family will not understand why the IEP hasn't started. They had a meeting, but they did not sign the IEP. Okay? If there's a disagreement, parent can challenge that proposed IEP and not sign it. Okay? But keep in mind that first IEP, parents must consent for the signature for the services before they can start. Okay? Now, for revised IEPs, it is a bit different. Parents have 10 instructional days after receiving a copy of the IEP to review it. If the parent does not challenge that proposed IEP by asking for another meeting, that new IEP goes into effect on day 11. It's called the 11th day rule, after the parent receives a copy. So in both cases, parents have a right to disagree with what the school is proposing. That is called the offering of FAPE. If they disagree, they may challenge the proposed IEP. Article 7 gives the parent the responsibility to make the school aware that they disagree and ask for another meeting, and that parent must propose how they wish to work through that disagreement. So once the case conference committee has met and an IEP has been developed, it must be finalized. So school has parent has 10 instructional days to challenge that ongoing IEP. So the initial, it just doesn't go into effect till signed. And if a parent doesn't like something, we always encourage them to come back and talk to their teacher of record, talk to their special ed director. But if you can't come to an agreement, then you ask for another meeting, because that is your right to go over and try to solve this. If parents challenge that IEP, then they're going to be having this discussion during these 10 days. Okay. School may implement that ongoing IEP on that 11th instructional day. We get a lot of calls where parents say, I didn't sign this. And we ask, did you contest and ask for another meeting? No, I just said I didn't like it. But for ongoing IEPs, because of the 11th day rule, school can and will implement it most of the time. Okay? So it is important to understand timeframes and understand what to do if you are not in agreement with the offering of FAPE. So I won't spend a lot of time on a written opinion, but it is important to know about. Any case conference committee member can submit a written opinion about a proposed IEP within 10 business days after a meeting. This can be useful for a parent who may be in substantial agreement with a proposed IEP, doesn't want to wish to delay implementation, but wishes to express concern about issues in which they're in disagreement. So a parent can give a written opinion about something that they're not very happy about, not very comfortable about. And anyone on the CCC can do that. The best way to document parental concerns, however, is to use the written notes that occur during the conference. And there's a box that even says parent concerns, and use the notes and make sure that the parents' concerns are clearly documented. The complaint process. I think it is important to touch on that. So when you think of a state complaint to the Office of Special Education, think of it as a procedural violation in general. A procedural violation can be addressed through the complaint process. You read the IEP and the regulations to see if you find instructions on how something should be done. So your student is supposed to receive speech therapy for 200 minutes every month. They're not. They are to be pulled out for testing. This is not happening. So those would be examples of procedural violations, and a parent can file a complaint with the Department of Education. They would do that through the iChamp system typically, though they can actually send a letter. There's a whole process of how to file a complaint, which is explained on DOE's website. If someone goes to DOE's website and puts in special education, they will find out all about the complaint process also. And so, because an IEP is written to be followed, if a school does not follow the IEP or the parent feels they don't, that's when they would file a complaint. First, though, I would encourage parents to reach out and speak to their special ed director. They're not required to, but a lot of times a problem can be solved just by reaching out to the special education director. You might also ask some questions like, what would be the best thing to do before I file this complaint? Well, that might be where you reach back out and try to see if you can solve this at that lower level. You want to build that relationship if possible. And many times a special ed director doesn't even know there's a problem until they get a complaint. So it is essential that the school personnel understand that you have a problem, what you see the issue is, and that you hope that it might be addressed without having to file a complaint. But of course, you can and do have the right to file that complaint if you feel that that is necessary. And then what happens? There's 10 days for the school and family to work together and solve it. If that does not happen, then the Department of Education does an investigation and will issue a report to see if there are any findings against the school. So, resolving other disagreements, parent may ask to meet with the staff with authority to resolve a disagreement. Maybe you've had a case conference and now you're just going to ask to meet with the special ed director. Okay. There can be some informal options to resolve the dispute process, right? And this could be reconvening another case conference with that a different public agency rep, like the special ed director. Okay. If an agreement can't be reached, there are other steps. And we're going to talk about those now. So if you're not in agreement and you reach back out and you're still not in agreement, I encourage you to consider contacting your special ed director. Okay. But if you're not coming to an agreement, you can then ask for mediation. Okay. And mediation is voluntary, and family and school both have to agree. And then there is a process on iChamp for that. And then the family and the school will come together with a state assigned mediator and discuss the issues. That mediator does not make the decision. They just mediate. And perhaps you come to an agreement or a partial agreement, or you don't. The last choice is to request a due process hearing. Okay. And a due process hearing is an administrative law proceeding before an impartial, independent hearing officer. And that hearing officer considers the information presented and issues a written decision. So everything is decided by the hearing officer. So when you're sitting at the case conference, there's a lot more ability for the school and the parent to come up with an idea or a solution. Otherwise, if you go to due process, it's going to be the hearing officer. Additionally, there is a resolution session or meeting that is similar to mediation, but occurs after due process has been filed. And it's an opportunity to try to resolve the issues before moving on to due process. Okay?
I have a question about
Yes.
the officer
uh
during the due process hearing. Are they typically a special education person, or is it someone just from the state?
That is a very good question. They are typically, and there's actually, if you look in Article 7, it will actually tell you the requirements. They are typically a judge, is my understanding. So um, there are certain requirements, and then they also go through special education training.
I just want to make sure they have that kind of background
Yes,
for
they
making that
they do.
decision. They have
Yes,
a background to understand the situation from both sides. Okay.
they do. So if you go to Article 7 and look under due process hearing, it will actually tell you about that whole process.
Okay.
Okay. And a parent is not required to be represented by an attorney at due process hearing, but due to the complexity of it and the legal nature, a family may want to consider that. And the school will have an attorney. And then lastly, there's also a civil suit option. And that's a procedural safeguard that's available only after due process hearing has been held. And any party disagreeing with the hearing officer's decision at a due process hearing may file for a judicial review in civil court. So we're almost done. So when we talk about a home file, people used to keep it in paper with paper in a filing cabinet. Now a lot of it's done electronically. As you can see here, you want to keep copies of the IEP. And most people are doing that electronically now. If you're missing one, ask your teacher of record to send it. Report cards, emails. If you're being asked to pick your child up from school, you want to keep track of those requests. How many days have they been suspended? Right? How many times have we been asked to pick them up? And additionally, know that sometimes things have been put in the IEP that maybe you didn't remember or agree on sometimes about picking up your child when there's a behavior. So you want to keep track of how many times your school is emailing you about concerns so that when you go to the case conference, you can say, well, I've been asked to pick John up 10 times. And maybe there's something in the behavior plan that list parent will come and get them, and then it's not considered a suspension. So you want to understand what is in all of your IEPs. You want to maybe make notes of phone conversations. Okay. You want to have copies of the evaluations, sample of the homework, the local and state assessments, the I learn, I read. It is important. So, and of course, medical information that you might have. So this can be done the old fashioned way in paper, or it can all be done electronically. So in summary, parent is an equal partner in the determinations and decisions made by the case conference committee. The IEP is a written document created by the CCC that has required components defining the individualized educational aspects that will be provided to the student. What's going to happen for the student during their school day? The teacher of record and parent need to monitor this implementation of the IEP and also teach advocacy skills so that the student knows what's in their IEP and they say, hey, I'm supposed to take my test in a small group. Hey, I'm supposed to have time and a half for my homework. So it is important for that student to learn those self advocacy skills early, and for a parent to understand how to work through disagreements that happen between school and parent. So please feel free to visit our website at insource.org. We have a variety of trainings on our YouTube channel where the Department of Education has spoken about a variety of things, choice scholarships. We have some Sherry Cripes from Purdue University speaking about bullying for this month. We have webinars having to do with just a variety of topical activities or organizations. So please visit our website, go to our YouTube channel, take part in some of our trainings, and learn those advocacy skills and educate yourself. And we are here to help in any way that we can. You can find your liaison by going to our website and saying, get help and find my liaison. You can contact us and follow us on social media. We also have a chat feature on our website. That's one of the things we started about 2 years ago. It's been very, very popular, especially for very quick answers. How do I get an evaluation? Because we have individuals there in the chat, and they are able to answer a lot of questions. And we also have a bilingual team for families who are Spanish speaking, and our staff that monitors our chat in the evenings um, speak Spanish. So we're very excited about that. Again, please make sure that you scan the QR code here, sign in, receive the resources, take the survey so that we can know if we are meeting your needs with our materials. And Kelly, I am back to you. Um, and additionally, Kelly has some information about alternate diploma and graduation requirements that could be very helpful for families. And it is really also, Kelly, just very important to ask questions, to understand your child's IEP, to understand also the process of special education, be familiar with your child's school policies and handbooks, and know that the federal and state law um, overrides school policy. But then at other times, state and federal law don't speak to an issue, so then it's going to be determined by school policy. So thank you so much for having me here tonight. I appreciate it, and I hope that it's been helpful for families and that they'll visit our website for more resources.
Lisa, I completely agree. Having two daughters with autism, both had IEPs, you definitely need to know what's in it, ask those questions, document, document, document.
And read over it when you
Yes,
get it back so that you can see if there's anything you
right.
want to discuss.
Absolutely. I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for
Thank
all this
you.
wonderful information, and everyone have a great night.
Thank you. Bye-bye.